I faked being poor. For 9 years, my sister banned me from her wedding for it, not knowing I was about to buy her husband's company. My mother offered me $500 to disappear. Not a metaphor, not an exaggeration. $500, transferred via Venmo, with a memo line that said travel funds, like she was doing me a favor, like she was the generous one in this exchange. I was sitting in my apartment in Manhattan at 11:47 at night, 3 monitors glowing in the dark in front of me, a half-eaten bowl of ramen going cold on my left, a contract on the center screen with a number on it that had 9 figures and a comma in a place that still made my stomach tighten every time I looked at it. And my mother was on the phone telling me that my presence at my sister's wedding would be a social liability. She didn't use those words exactly. My mother never uses the direct version of anything. What she said was, "Arthur's family is very polished, Matilda. Genevieve deserves one day without awkward questions about you." About me, specifically my car, which was a 2009 Honda Civic with a split dashboard and 1 working rear window. My phone, which had a crack running from the top right corner to the middle of the screen that I had never repaired because I genuinely didn't notice it anymore. My apartment, which they had never visited but loved to reference in the tone people use when discussing places they've heard, are rough. 3 days before my sister's wedding, I was uninvited. Not because I had done anything, not because of any conflict or insult or broken relationship, because of how I looked, because of what they believed I was worth. On my center monitor, $91 million waited for my signature. I let my mother talk. "My name is Matilda Voss. I'm 31 years old, and for 9 years, I have been the family embarrassment. The sister who didn't marry well, didn't dress well, didn't network her way into the right rooms. The one who ate at Christmas dinner and answered questions about her work with vague non-answers because the honest answer was too complicated to give people who had already decided they weren't interested. The one my mother described to acquaintances as finding her path, which in our family is the phrase reserved for people who haven't performed success in a visible enough way to be claimed. I let them believe all of it, every single word, because I had learned something early in my career that most people learn too late, if they learn it at all. Greedy people ignore what they think is worthless, and there is no better shield in the world than being underestimated by people who are watching you. But I'm ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this started, because the context matters, not for sympathy. I've stopped needing that, but because you need to understand how a family can look directly at something real for 9 years and choose every single time to see something else. I grew up in a suburb of Providence, Rhode Island, in a family that was comfortable by most measures and acutely aware of being less comfortable than the families they were adjacent to. My father, Gerald Voss, worked in commercial real estate. My mother, Patricia, ran the social architecture of our household with the precision of someone who understood that your standing in a community was a resource that required constant maintenance. Genevieve, 3 years older, was blonde and graceful and understood intuitively the performance my mother was directing. She was good at it, still is. I was the other one. Not ugly, not stupid, not unkind, just not performing. I wore practical clothes. I read things that weren't assigned. I got into Brown on a partial scholarship and spent more time in the computer science lab than at the social events my mother emailed me reminders about. I graduated with honors and an idea that had been taking shape in my head since sophomore year, and I moved to New York City with $11,000 in savings and a laptop I'd bought refurbished, and the specific, quiet certainty of someone who knows exactly what they're building even if they can't show anyone the blueprint yet. The idea was this: education technology was broken in a specific, fixable way. The platforms that existed were designed for institutions, for universities buying licenses, for corporations running compliance training, for systems that moved slowly and bought in bulk. Nobody was building for the individual learner who needed credentials that mattered, pathways that adapted, content that was actually current. I had been that learner. I knew what she needed. I was going to build it. I named the company Beacon Ledger Learning Systems. I registered it as an LLC on a Tuesday afternoon at the New York Department of State office in Lower Manhattan, paid the filing fee in cash, and walked back to my apartment and started coding. For the first 2 years, I worked nights and weekends at a UX consulting firm to pay rent, poured every spare dollar into Beacon Ledger, and told my family I was in tech when they asked, which was rarely. My mother described my situation to her friends as, "Matilda is doing freelance work while she figures out her direction." I heard this secondhand from my aunt and filed it away without comment. Year 3, Beacon Ledger launched in beta. 4,000 users in the first month, 12,000 by month 3. Not enough to quit my day job, enough to know the idea was real. I quit my day job at the end of year 3 anyway. My savings were mostly gone. I was eating rice and frozen vegetables and working 18-hour days in an apartment that had a mouse problem and a heating system that gave up every February. I drove home to Providence for Christmas in the Honda Civic, which I had bought for $3,400 from a lot in Queens, and I sat at my family's table while my father talked about commercial real estate and my mother talked about Genevieve's new boyfriend, and nobody asked me anything specific about my work because they had concluded there was nothing specific to ask about. Genevieve's new boyfriend was Arthur Pemberton. I met him that Christmas briefly. Handsome, polished, the particular brand of socially fluent that comes from expensive schools and the right last name. He worked at Northridge Global Capital, one of the larger private equity and venture capital firms operating out of New York and Boston, and he talked about it the way people talk about institutions institutions they believe are more significant than they are. He shook my hand, looked at me with the pleasant blankness of someone who had already categorized me as unimportant, and turned back to my father. I drove home in the Civic and worked until 4 in the morning. Year 4, Beacon Ledger's first institutional contract, a mid-size professional development company that licensed our platform for their internal training arm. $92,000, annually renewable. I hired 2 contractors, moved to a better apartment, though I kept the Civic, partly from habit and partly because I had started to understand the value of the image I was presenting at home. Greedy people ignore what they think is worthless. Every year I went home for Christmas in the Civic with the cracked phone in clothes that cost nothing. Every year my mother found new ways to describe my situation to herself, still finding her feet, such a hard worker, in her own way. Once, and this is the one I kept in a note on my phone for a long time, she told someone at a dinner party that I was the artistic one, very inner-directed, not as social as Genevieve. I was a software company founder with 400,000 users and a growth rate that had attracted the attention of 2 venture capital firms. But sure, inner-directed. I took a meeting with Sterling Ridge Ventures in year 5. Their principal, David Cho, had been watching Beacon Ledger's metrics for 6 months before reaching out. David is 47, built Sterling Ridge's early-stage education tech portfolio from a standing start, and has a reputation in the industry for identifying companies that are undervalued because they're being run by someone who doesn't perform wealth convincingly. He told me this directly in our first meeting, which is how I knew I could trust him. "You dress like you don't need the money," he said, looking at my jacket. "I dress like someone who doesn't want attention from the wrong people," I said. He smiled. We shook hands. Sterling Ridge led our Series A at a valuation that made my accountant, a meticulous man named Robert Fleiss, who had been doing my book since year 2, call me from his car on a Sunday to confirm he had read the term sheet correctly. He had. I did not tell my family. This requires some explanation, because most people hear this and assume it was cruelty, that I was withholding information I could have shared in order to savor a future reveal. That's not what it was. What it was this. I had watched my family for 31 years, and I understood with precision what would happen if they knew. My mother would call me every day to discuss things she didn't understand. My father would introduce me to his real estate contacts as though they were my next logical step. Genevieve would mention it to Arthur casually, and Arthur worked at Northbridge, and I could not afford the specific kind of complication that comes from your private business life becoming a networking opportunity for your brother-in-law before the deal you're working toward is closed. More than that, I had spent 9 years building something without any of their help. Without their encouragement, their capital, their contacts, their belief, they had offered none of it. They had not offered it because they had looked at me and concluded I was not worth offering it to. That calculation was theirs. I had made my own. I was not going to hand them credit for a story they had no part in. So I kept the Civic. I kept the cracked phone. I drove to Providence every Christmas and sat at the table and let my mother describe me to herself. And I watched my family the way you watch a film you've already seen. Not for new information, but to notice things you missed the first time. Year 6, Beacon Ledger crossed 1 million users. Year 7, we launched our enterprise licensing platform and signed contracts with 3 mid-size university systems. Year 8, David Cho introduced me to Harris Alderman, a managing director at Northbridge Global Capital, at a conference in San Francisco. I shook his hand. We spoke for 20 minutes about our growth metrics. He did not know I was Genevieve's sister. I did not mention it. It was at that conference that the acquisition conversation started, quietly in the way these things always start. A compliment about the platform, a question about long-term plans, a card exchanged at the end of a conversation that ran longer than it was supposed to. Harris Alderman followed up by email 3 days later. His assistant copied on the thread. I did not tell my family. 13 months of due diligence, term sheet negotiations, legal review, and the specific sustained anxiety of watching a deal this size move through the machinery of a major capital firm without detonating. 13 months, and the final signing was scheduled for a Friday night at the Waldorf Astoria in Manhattan, a close-of-deal event that Northbridge hosted for acquisitions of this scale, because Richard Hale, their CEO, believed in marking moments. The signing was on a Friday. Genevieve's wedding was on a Saturday. 3 days before the Saturday, my mother called. I knew before she spoke that something was wrong. She has a register she uses when she's delivering news she has already rehearsed, a smoothness that is just slightly too smooth, the vocal equivalent of someone reading from a script they have gone over enough times to make it sound natural. She handed the phone to Genevieve first. "Arthur's family is coming," Genevieve said. "His mother invited half of Newport society. We talked it over. It would be better if you didn't come." I held the phone and looked at my 3 monitors. "I'm your sister," I said. "That's exactly why this is hard." My mother took over then. The explanation was thorough and unapologetic, which I have to give her credit for. She didn't dress it up more than necessary. Arthur's family was polished. The wedding was at Rosemont Hall, a venue in Newport that charged $12,000 for the Saturday booking alone. The guest list included people whose opinion of the Voss family mattered, and my presence, my car, my clothes, my undefined career, the cumulative impression I made, was a variable she could not control. Then she offered me $500. I looked at the acquisition contract on my center screen. $91 million, initiated in my name. 9 years in the making, closing in 72 hours. I felt something move through my chest that wasn't quite any single emotion. Not rage, not not grief, not even satisfaction, not yet. It was something older and quieter, the specific sensation of a thing you have known for a long time becoming, finally, undeniable. I understand, I said. You're handling this beautifully, my mother said, with what sounded like genuine relief. I'm sure you're right, I said. I hung up. I sat for a moment in the glow of 3 monitors. Then I opened my laptop and sent one email. To David Cho, Sterling Ridge Ventures. CC, Robert Fleiss, Fleiss Financial Advisory. Subject, Friday confirmed. No changes to timeline. Then I called my assistant, Nora, and asked her to confirm the car service for Friday evening and to arrange for the gown to be pressed and delivered to my apartment by 4 p.m. The gown was deep blue. I had bought it 6 months earlier when the deal had moved into final documentation phase because I had believed it would close and I believed in dressing for the thing you've already decided is going to happen. It had been hanging in my closet in a garment bag, waiting. I had not told anyone it existed. I did not respond to my mother's Venmo request for my details to send the $500. I didn't need the money, and I didn't want the record. Friday came. I spent the morning on a final review call with our legal team. Vanessa Park, our lead M&A counsel, 11 years in technology transactions at one of the top 5 firms in New York, who had guided the deal through due diligence with the specific calm energy of someone who has seen every variety of last-minute complication and finds them interesting rather than alarming. The call lasted 3 hours and ended with Vanessa saying, "We're clean. Tonight should be a formality." I showered. I dressed. The blue gown. Diamond earrings that had been my grandmother's and which I wore only on occasions I considered genuine. Hair pinned back in a way that took 20 minutes and looked effortless, which I have learned is the only kind of effort worth making in rooms like the one I was about to enter. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror in my bedroom. I had stood in front of mirrors like this for years. In this apartment, in the smaller one before it, in jeans and a t-shirt, or the practical blazer I wore to client meetings. And I had looked at the woman my family saw when they looked at me, the struggling one, the odd one, the one who needed $500 to make her disappearance from the family photograph feel dignified. The woman in the mirror tonight did not resemble that woman in any way that mattered. I picked up my phone, the new one, bought 2 weeks ago, which I had not yet shown my family because there had been no occasion, and texted Nora, "Ready." The car arrived at 6:45, a black Cadillac Escalade with a driver named James who had been with the car service company for 14 years, and who I knew by name because I had been using them for the past 3 years, without telling my family that I was the kind of person who uses a car service by name. We drove to the Waldorf. I want to describe what it felt like to walk into that room, but I find that the honest description is quieter than people expect. There was no rush of triumph, no dramatic internal fanfare. What I felt, walking through those doors, was simply correct, like a key that has been waiting a long time to find its lock. Richard Hale, CEO of Northbridge Global Capital, 63 years old, 28 years in private equity, a man whose professional handshake I had studied from across a room for 13 months, met me at the entrance with both hands extended. "Matilda," he said, "tonight is yours." He meant the room, the event, the culmination of a process his firm had initiated, and my work had made worth initiating. He said it with the warmth of someone who respects the thing they're acquiring, which is the only kind of acquisition worth being part of. David Cho was there. He found me within the first 10 minutes, pressed a glass of champagne into my hand, and said only, "You built something real." Coming from David, who has seen most things, this was a complete sentence. Vanessa Park arrived at 7:30 in a charcoal suit and spent 45 minutes with me and the Northbridge legal team doing a final walkthrough of the documentation, which was, as she had predicted, a formality. Everything was in order. Everything had been in order for 6 weeks. The walkthrough was for the ritual of it, for the institutional satisfaction of having reviewed the thing before you signed it. At 9 p.m., I stood in front of a digital signature interface. We had gone fully electronic on all final documentation per Northbridge's preference, with Vanessa beside me and David across the table and Richard Hale at the head of it. And I looked at the number one more time. $91 million. 9 years. I thought briefly about the Christmas dinners, about my mother's voice saying inner directed, about the Venmo notification I had not yet dismissed. Then I clicked. The press embargo lifted simultaneously. It had been set at 9 p.m. at Northbridge's request. They preferred evening releases for major transactions, which generate morning news cycles. Across the room, phones buzzed against jacket pockets and table surfaces. The screens above the bar that had been showing market data shifted. Northbridge Global Capital acquires Beacon Ledger Learning Systems in $91 million cash deal. Beneath the headline, a photograph. The one from my company's most recent press kit, updated 6 months ago. Me, in the office, in front of the 3 monitors, my name, my company, my face. The room applauded. Richard lifted his glass. Someone near the back called out something that was swallowed by the general noise. Vanessa touched my arm briefly and said, "Well done," in the specific way she says things, which is without decoration. I smiled. I took a sip of champagne. 400 miles north, in a stone hall in Newport, Rhode Island, Arthur Pemberton checked his phone. I know what happened next because Genevieve eventually told me, in fragments, over the course of several conversations I did not seek out but did not refuse. She told me the way people tell stories about experiences that still haven't fully resolved into meaning, in pieces, going back to correct details, stopping in places that still hurt. Arthur had stepped out to the stone terrace after the first dance. He always check the Northbridge alerts, she said, and she'd learned to accept this as the price of being married to someone with that particular relationship to professional ambition. He was on the terrace for less than 2 minutes. He came back through the ballroom doors too fast. She knew immediately that something was wrong, not because of his expression, but because of the speed. Arthur moved at one speed in social situations, measured and deliberate, and he was not moving at that speed. He found her by the bar. He held out his phone without speaking. She read the headline. She saw the number. She scrolled to the photograph. "What did you tell me your sister does?" His voice was quiet, which was worse than loud. She told me that she genuinely did not process what she was seeing for a moment, that her brain tried to file it under misunderstanding, under coincidence, under there must be another Matilda Voss. She had never concealed my existence from Arthur, but she had described me the way my mother had taught her to describe me, the struggling one, the odd one, the one who was finding her direction. And the woman on that screen, mid-acquisition at a Northbridge gala, in a deep blue gown, was not the woman she had described. The room noticed. Rooms always notice when money changes shape in front of them. Lady Eleanor Kensington, Arthur's mother, the woman my mother had been trying to impress, the woman whose social approval had been cited as the reason I was not welcome at the wedding, stepped forward and read the screen over Genevieve's shoulder. Her expression, Genevieve told me, did not register shock. It registered recalibration, the expression of someone rapidly revising a set of social equations. Arthur left within the hour. Not dramatically, he was too controlled for drama. He told Genevieve quietly that they needed to speak with their families about a significant omission in the information that had been presented to the Kensingtons prior to the engagement. Lady Eleanor said nothing at the reception. She didn't need to. The silence that filled the room after Arthur walked out was doing the work for her. My phone started vibrating at 9:41. Dad, Genevieve, Mom again, my aunt. A number I didn't recognize that was probably a cousin. Mom, a third time. I stood at the edge of the room at the Waldorf, a fresh glass of champagne in my hand, and watched the notifications come in. Beside me, David Cho was talking to two of Northbridge's managing directors about something I wasn't tracking. The room was warm and loud in the specific way of celebrations where the money is real. I let the calls ring. Then, at 9:58, I picked up. My mother's voice came through on the edge of something, not quite tears. The too composed version that precedes tears in people who have trained themselves not to cry in front of others. "Matilda, tell me this is a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," I said. "You lied to us." I thought about that for a moment, about the Christmas dinners and the Civic and the note on my phone and the $500 and the phrase inner directed. "No," I said. "I let you believe yourselves." Genevieve's voice behind my mother, unraveling. "Arthur is leaving. His mother said we deceived them. They're saying the engagement may have been. Matilda, you have to call Northbridge. Tell them Arthur is family now. Tell them to—" My father took the phone. His voice had the specific texture of a man reaching for authority he no longer has. "Call Northbridge. Tell them Arthur is family. Fix this. Not I'm sorry. Not we were wrong. Not I didn't know you were building something real and I should have asked. Fix this." I looked at my reflection in the glass of the door across the room. The blue gown, my grandmother's earrings, the face of a woman who had built a $91 million company in 9 years in the spaces between Christmas dinners where her family described her to other people's mothers as finding her direction. "You uninvited me," I said, "because you thought I had no value. And now you want me to fix something because you found out I do." My father started to speak. "That tells me everything I need to know about what your love actually costs." I ended the call. I stood for a moment with the phone in my hand. Then I put it in my clutch and turned back toward the room where my deal was still being celebrated, where people who had read my pitch decks and reviewed my user metrics and spent 13 months determining whether I was worth $91 million were drinking champagne and being warm to each other in the way of people who have just done something they're proud of. There were 112 unread messages by the time I got home. I read none of them that night. There are things I want to say about what happened in the weeks that followed, and I want to say them without sentimentality, because sentimentality would be the wrong register for what this actually was. Arthur and Genevieve did not divorce immediately. They are still, as of this telling, technically married, though from what I understand, the Kensington family's investment in the marriage has significantly cooled. What the Kensingtons had wanted, in the way that families like theirs always want things, was a certain kind of alliance. The right name, the right social position, the right presentation. What they discovered they had was a family that had misrepresented itself, that had described one of its members as a liability, rather than acknowledge that she was building something significant, that had traded on an image of genteel aspiration, while the actual financial substance of the family's next generation was being constructed in a Manhattan apartment by a woman eating frozen vegetables and driving a cracked dashboard Civic. It was not a comfortable discovery for anyone in that ballroom. Richard Hale, who heard some version of the story from Harris Alderman, who heard it from Arthur directly, called me the following Monday and said only, "I assume you're not taking their calls." I confirmed. He said, "Good, don't. We have not discussed it since." Vanessa Park, when I told her the outline of the story months later, was quiet for a moment and then said, "The best revenge is a clean cap table." This is the funniest thing a lawyer has ever said to me, and I think about it regularly. David Cho, who has known the broad strokes of my family situation since year 5, when it became relevant to understanding why I was structured the way I was, sent me a text the morning after the deal closed. It said, "You did it the right way, quietly and completely. That's the only way that counts." I kept that one too. to. My mother called 37 times in the 2 weeks after the wedding. I answered on the 38th call, 6 weeks later, when I had decided I was ready for the conversation. It was not the conversation she wanted. She wanted absolution, the specific kind that comes when the wronged party offers forgiveness before the wrong has been fully named. I did not offer that. What I offered was this: a relationship going forward on terms I defined. She could know me as I actually was, or she could continue to know the version of me she had constructed, but she could not have both, and she could not have access to my life while describing me to others in the language of embarrassment and limitation. She cried. I let her. Then she said very quietly, I didn't know. I know you didn't. I said, that's the part we need to talk about. We are talking about it. Slowly. It is not resolved. I don't expect it to be resolved in the way that satisfying stories require things to be resolved, with an apology that covers everything and a warmth that returns to how it was before. There is no before I want to return to. There is only forward, from a position of honesty about what we are to each other and what we are not. Genevieve and I have spoken twice. Both conversations were brief and careful, two people walking across ice and checking each step before committing weight. I do not know what our relationship will eventually be. I know what it will not be. It will not be the one we had, where she was the family's success story and I was its footnote, where she performed for an audience that I was not considered worthy of. The Honda Civic is still in my garage. I don't drive it anymore, but I haven't sold it. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe because it is the most accurate document of 9 years of my life that exists, more accurate than any press release, any acquisition announcement, any photograph from any gala. It is the proof that I did it without any of the things people assume you need, without the right connections or the right introduction or the right family believing in you, without being seen, until the moment I chose to be. If you have been the one at the table that nobody asks about, the one described in the third person while you're sitting right there, the one offered $500 to make your absence feel like a decision rather than an exile, I want you to know something. They are not ignoring you because you're not worth watching. They're ignoring you because they've already decided. And the thing about people who have already decided is that they stop paying attention. And the thing about people who stop paying attention is that they miss everything that happens next. Let them. Build anyway, quietly, completely, the only way that counts. If you made it this far, you already know which person at the table you've been. Hit like. You've earned it.